Nano Machine by Hanjo Wiolia. Chapter 413. North Sea Ice Palace. Part 1. If one goes up the Great Plains and to the north, one will reach an area called Su. Although the northern side of Su is often regarded as a place with blizzards year-round, it still consisted of dense and coniferous mountains and grasslands. Of course, it's cold year-round, making it difficult to compare with Jianghu. One could tell by just one look at the snow, which hasn't melted on the peaks of the mountains. It was cold, and it snowed often. There was a huge lake hidden on the northern side of Su. The name of the lake is Lake Baikal. It was a huge lake incomparable to an average lake which you could find anywhere on the continent. The people who settled on Lake Baikal called it several different names. Sacred Sea. The blue eyes on the cold earth. There were several names, but the name most known to the people of Jianghu is Vast Lake, the sanctuary of the North Sea Ice Palace. And inside it was a vast island. Although the lake is enormous, the island's total area is about 18 billion pyong, Korean unit of measurement. It was unreasonable to dismiss such a massive island as a mere island. That island contained shorter than average mountains and fields, and between mountain peaks on the southeast side, there was a huge palace nestled in like a fortress. The exterior of the magnificent structure was not inferior compared to the main building of the Forces of Justice. The unmelted white snow piled up on the red tiles made the fortress look like a castle made of snow. People called that fortress the North Sea Ice Palace. Just looking at it revealed beauty and tranquility, making people feel calm, but currently, there were subtle tremors in the North Sea Ice Palace. Growling. Not just the huge palace, but also the walls were shaking violently. The epicenter of the tremors wasn't that far from the North Sea Ice Palace. The further north, the stronger the vibrations. Grrrr. Further north, where the vibration was getting stronger, there was no grass, just barren land. If you go up to the northwest, there was a place made of solid bare mountains that looked like they were made up of piled soil. This was the only place on the island which had no living things. There was even a feeling of death spreading around that place. Surrounded by the bare mountains, there was the tallest bare mountain, and the entrance to the cave was located at the bottom of that mountain, which had been cracked because of the strong vibrations. The cave was deeper than it looked. If one entered the cave and walked along a narrow passage for a long time, there would be a vast and expansive space in the cave, made entirely from blue ice. The ice-like stones are called adularia stones, which had the property of turning harder as the cold increased. Whoop! The space was lit with numerous torches. Nearly 500 warriors in white fur had their hands on the floor of the space, which was lit with torches emitting cold chi. Jirik. The intensity of the cold they radiated barely maintained the ice's hardness. The warriors, dressed in white fur, were the people of the North Sea Ice Palace. They were playing the role of infusing cold chi so that the adularia stones wouldn't break. However, they all looked exhausted. Hold on a little more. The next shift will come. Until then, we need to keep the cold chi flowing. Why yes. The shouts of the North Sea Ice Palace warriors were vague. A middle-aged man with short silver hair played the role of encouraging them. He was an elder of the North Sea Ice Palace, Omubong. Dririk. Omubong's face was drenched in sweat. He too was holding his palms on the floor, but he was also exhausted as he had been instilling cold chi into the cave for more than 3 hours straight. Crrrk. Rumble. The glacial cave shook. The vibration got worse with time. Despite cold chi being injected into the cave, the cracks in the adularia stones only worsened. Omubong's face, who had been resting his palms on the ice floor, was unusual. It felt more vivid when he had his palms on the floor. The terrifying beating of the monster, who was struggling to climb up through the sealed ice. Creep. Every time he felt a throb, He was terrified to the point of nearly having a heart attack. Any more than this is impossible. The dragon spirit, whose seals were released, kept growing stronger as the warriors turned weaker. The cold chi injected in the Agilarius stones in 3 shifts ended up reaching its limit. That was how the cold worked. The new shift of 500 men arrived at the exit site of the cave. Seal Ejong was the one who brought them, but despite having their breakfast, they all looked utterly exhausted. "Elder, we are here to change." That was when Omubong responded to Seal Ejong with a serious expression. "I don't think that this will last any longer. I felt the vibration while coming here. The vibrations are strong enough that they can be felt from the palace too. Quack. It would be better for us to fight the bloody dragon turtle with all our forces in the palace than keeping this one locked up and exhausting ourselves." At the complaint of Elder Omubong, Elder Seal Ejong nodded. It was very evident that their warriors were exhausted. Everyone was scared, but some people thought that fighting and dying was better than this. Be patient. Once the Ulan contingents come, even those who don't want to fight will have to go and fight that monster to the death. Huh. That bastard. He. Elder. The men are listening, so. Did I say anything wrong? There is no guarantee when those strangers will arrive, and we are being forced to sacrifice ourselves here, huh? Tatada. While the elder Omubong complained in anger, someone rushed to the exit side of the cave and shouted so that all the people inside could listen. Yulan contingents have arrived. At that cry, both the elders' eyes widened as they looked at each other. Right when they were all getting frustrated with the work, the Ulan contingents finally arrived. Omubong got up from the ground and asked, "Where are they all now?" "They are in the pier in the southeast of the island." The scale of Baikal Lake was so vast that it could be called a river or sea. Naming it a lake was a ridiculous decision. There were 2 ways to enter the island: crossing by boat from the southeast or crossing by taking the ferry for a short distance from the northwest. It was better to cross by boat, as the latter took up too much time. At the dockside, many palace officials from the North Sea Ice Palace gathered. After hearing the news that Ulan's contingents were crossing the lake, they rushed to greet them. Looking out from the pier, one couldn't even see the other side of the lake. Above the watchtower, perched up on a nearby hill, a middle-aged man and an elderly-looking man with white hair and gray robes with ornate patterning looked at the lake. They were Dan Jushin, the deputy king of the North Sea Ice Palace, and First Elder Seol Young Gwi. "See over there, my lord. It isn't large, but we need to be happy." The Ulan's contingents came a long way and were waiting to be greeted by the deputy king. "Don't call for them just yet." First Elder. "You right, my king, excessive humility isn't good either." Dan Jushin smiled lightly at Seol Young Gwi's words. Most people were already calling him the king instead of deputy king, as he had 80% of the control in the North Sea Ice Palace. Dozens of ships could be seen in the middle of the vast lake. In half an hour, they'll arrive. I hope that the prince is not on their ship. Dan Jushin's eyes, which smiled at Seol Young Gwi, turned cold. Although the roles changed, at one time, the prince was his nephew, whom he taught martial arts. Don't talk about the prince anymore. Even if you are offended by this old man's words, there is nothing we can do about it. Without him, the king will be able to unite the remaining people more naturally. I think we would be fortunate if the demonic cult took care of him. All the elders opened their arms and welcomed the report from Dan Jushin that their prince was going to ask the demonic cult for reinforcements. Even outside Jianghu, everyone knew that the infamous demonic cult would never grant people's requests. If he came back alive, it would be a miracle. Huh. Seol Young Gwi spoke while looking at Dan Jushin, who seemed pissed. Don't you think that the former king brought this all upon us? If the former king hadn't promoted the prince, who had no talent, as the crown prince, such a mess wouldn't have happened. Most of the elders, even First Elder Seol Young-gwi, were against it. North Sea Ice Palace had a strict system based on merit. In such a place, it was unacceptable for a person who achieved nothing as the prince to get placed on the throne just because he is the eldest son of the king. Maybe the former king thought that if the treasure was found the situation Seol Young-gwi, who had been talking for a long time, was taken aback. It was because Dan Jushin was staring at another side of the lake. What is he looking at? Dan Jushin was known to be a supreme master who was skilled among all the warriors of the north. King? At the call from an elder, Dan Jushin frowned. It seems that the situation is completely different from our expectations. They are still far away so I can't see clearly, but those black. I think it's them. What do you mean? Dan Jushin, the deputy king of the palace, spoke in a low voice. Demonic cult. At those words, Seol Young-gwi's expression hardened. Slasp. Splash. Dozens of ships were crossing Lake Baikal. Among them, the leaders of Ulan were aboard the ship furthest ahead. Everyone in there couldn't help but admire the vast lake, which was transparent and beautiful, almost forgetting about the dragon turtle. A view which they could never see in Jeonju. If it wasn't for the cold weather, they wouldn't have felt such a difference. Jigul Sohee, who was admiring the superb view for a while, approached Commander Kong Soa, who was looking at the faintly visible island from the ship. Leader Kong. Kong Soa didn't respond to her call. He kept looking ahead. Jigul Sohee held back a bitter smile on her face as if she was getting used to his cold attitude. Leader Kong. The warriors of the contingent haven't rested properly because of our plan to get here quickly. Why not ask the deputy king about giving them one day to rest if the situation isn't urgent? Because of Dan Jushin, who said that the situation in the North Sea Ice Palace was urgent, their journey was made in haste. Except for when the horses were given some time to breathe, no warriors had ample sleep. All the warriors in the contingent were tired. It was highly unreasonable to travel as far as they did in just 10 days. Commander Kong? At Jigul Sohee's repeated call, Kong Soa responded coldly. As the commander, it is my decision to make. I didn't come here as a warrior, so pay attention to what you are supposed to do. This made her upset. She even thought it would have been better if she asked Mueang Kong, one of the leaders, to deliver the message to Kong Soa. She knew how much Kong Soa hated everything related to Yun Buso. What I don't like is my second priority. I don't get why he had to insist on such an unreasonable march. If our warriors get too exhausted, dispatching them would be difficult. They knew that the situation was urgent, but after the meeting with the Great Han clan's chief, Kong Soa hastened their advance. He even decreased the break for the horses to rest from 5 times to 3 times a day. Thanks to that, more than 30 horses died from exhaustion. Something doesn't feel right. It was because of the unique gut feeling that Kong Soa had recently. He had a better sense of situation than others, and the night he negotiated with the Great Han clan, he felt something ominous. That unsure instinct made him hurry even more. I can't do this anymore. Do as you wish. Jigul Sohee, who had been holding her anger back, couldn't anymore. Having said what she wanted to, she went into her cabin on the ship to get some rest. It was then. Whoa! Whoa! A commotion was heard from the rear of the ship. To be precise, it seemed like the sound was coming from the ships following them and not the one they were on. What is it? I think something has happened. Miss Jigul. Mueang Kong, who was resting in his cabin, came out and said to her, I think we should go and take a look. As a result, Jigul Sohee and all the leaders moved towards the tail of the ship. Since dozens of ships were crossing the lake, the entire back of their ship covered, they couldn't see the cause of the commotion, only the loud shouts could be heard. "What is it?" Puzzled, Kong Soa focused on the sounds coming from the ships. The warriors on the ship seemed to be shouting in shock and awe. "There! No way, that is ridiculous. No, they are running on water. Is that even possible?" The shouts from the back ships were all about someone running on water. It had been nearly a day since their ship set sail, and they were still a long way from land. They were supposed to be halfway there. Huang Boneng, the head of the Huangbo clan, spoke to Moyong Kong. "What do they mean by running on water?" Moyong Kong frowned and mumbled. "Water step? Water step. People who reached a certain level ascended light superscript 1, allowing them to use this technique to run on the surface of water. Though not as known as walking in the air, warriors who have reached a certain level require a high energy level to run even on the shortest distance on water. However, running on such a vast lake is close to impossible." "Is that possible? This is such a wide lake. What the heck did they see to speak those nonsensical words, huh?" Huang Bonuing, who was complaining, stopped. He doubted his own eyes. Go goodness! Not just him, but everyone at the back of the ship looked at the same place with gaping mouths. To their surprise, they saw a figure running across the lake at great speed. Pat! Pat! The water rippled where this man stepped, making the water look like a soft bed. A genuinely electrifying skill. How can such a thing be possible in this huge lake? Everyone was shocked. However, the figure moving towards them suddenly climbed onto the back of one of the ships Ulan contingents were on. Tap. Ugh. An enemy. SRRNG. SRRNG. The people on the ship, the warriors of the contingent, pulled out their weapons. At that time, Moyong Kong and Jigul Sohi shouted at the same time. Lo Lord Chun. The white-faced man swept his long hair to the back. He was the lord of the demonic cult, Chun Yuan. Everyone was startled, but Chun Yuan looked at everyone on the ship with sharp eyes and spoke with a cynical voice. Who is Kong Soa? Kong Soa's face turned perplexed as he heard his name coming out of Chun Yuan's mouth. Chapter 414. North Sea Ice Palace. Part 2. Above the southwest pier's watchtower, Dan Jushin looked across the lake in shock. He only looked at the scene with a stiff expression until a moment ago, but seeing how his eyes were now trembling, First Elder Seol Young Gwi asked in wonder. King. Did something happen? To that question, Dan Jushin answered with a trembling voice. The demonic cult has such monsters in it? Monsters? I'm doubting my eyes. To run across half the lake at that, what do you mean? Someone broke away from the demonic cult's group and ran across half the lake at a high speed. Lake Baikal is as vast as a sea or river, so running halfway across it in such a short period of time is ridiculous. Although the flow of the water was indeed calm, it was impossible for even Dan Jushin, one of the strongest warriors in the north, to traverse the lake at such a high speed. How can that happen? No way. Did Chen Yuzhong, one of the 5 strongest warriors, come here directly? Dan Jushin, the deputy king of the palace, mumbled while narrowing his eyes. He didn't know the current news in Jianghu, so he had no way of guessing who it was. On the other hand, at this moment on the furthest-most ship, Dan Juzong, an envoy from the North Sea Ice Palace, who was next to Moyong Kong, looked at Chen Yuan in surprise. No matter how much he looked at him, it seemed like he was a member of the cult. However, as soon as Moyong Kong called the man Lord Chun. Lord? Leader Moyong? At the cautious question of Dan Juzong, Moyong Kong answered in a hushed voice. You might not know, but that person is the lord of the demonic cult. The demonic cult. Dan Zhuzong wondered if it was true, but the man really was the lord of the demonic cult. He knew that the new lord was young, but for it to turn out to be true. The significance of the lord of the demonic cult's appearance in the North Sea Ice Palace became clear. Did Baekhyun really persuade them? How, with what means? It was amazing. He thought that Baekhyun was bound to fail. The elders also expected him to get expelled from the cult, and in the worst case, they thought that the demonic cult would deal with him. However, it was shocking that one of the three major forces that divided Jianghu in recent times appeared. Whoa! The lord of the demonic cult? Is he really the demon god? The people were all in thought. When they learned the person who came onto their ship's real identity, their faces turned fearful. In particular, Moyong Kong, who was the only one who had seen what happened in the Jin castle, was already breaking out in cold sweat, despite the cold weather. This is bad. Moyong Kong looked at Jigul Sohee. She, too, nodded her head with a puzzled expression. Rather than suddenly appearing on their ship, the problem was that Chen Yoan was looking for someone. He must have bumped into the Great Hung clan. Moyong Kong had heard from Jigul Sohee that Kong Soa, the commander of their current troops, devised a scheme with the war chief. They were worried about the scheme from the start. They even thought that it would be better to dissuade Kong Soa, or maybe they felt like they should let him deal with the possible consequences. However, as a result of various thoughts, they ended up thinking that even if the demonic cult did send troops, it was unlikely for Chen Yoan, their lord, to come. We should act calm. Although it was an alliance, the relationship between the Ulan and the demon cult had been in disarray recently. If it weren't for the Blade God's 6 martial clan, they would have been aiming for each other's throat. The situation in Jin Castle, the harm done to Yun Buso, the massacre of people belonging to the forces of Great Heaven, and the change of state religion because of those reasons, all the factions of Ulan became outraged at the mention of the demonic cult. For Lord Chun to appear here. Jigul Sohee was at a loss on how to solve this situation. At first, she wanted to dissuade Kong Soa, but thinking of what Chen Yoan did to her fiancé Yun Buso, she decided to stay back. She was literally on the lookout. Miss Jigul. If we don't take any measures right away, Kong Soa will be in danger. Huh? You might not know since it has been a long time since you've seen him, but any person who threatens Chen Yoan never leaves alive. Chen Yoan killed Nam Gun Kyong, the head of the Nam Gun clan, without even blinking an eye while in front of the Ulan leaders. Even the great leader Imak was unable to stop him. It wouldn't be strange if he killed Kong Soa. Jigul Sohee sent a message. For now, I'll get Lord Chun's attention. No matter how much she disliked Kong Soa, he was still the commander of their troops and the child of Imak. She couldn't let him get hurt. But it must be you. However, Chen Yoan found Kong Soa. Ah. Jigul Sohee touched her forehead. When he asked who Kong Soa was, everyone on the ship looked towards Kong Soa, allowing him to be found. Diverting his attention was a failure from the beginning. Jigul Sohee moved in front of Chen Yoan, who hurriedly tried to approach Kong Soa. Pack. She politely greeted him. Lord Chun. It has been a long time. I am Jigul Sohee, warrior of Ulan and the forces of justice. There was only one thing she knew. They had a small relationship that was created when she went to the demonic cult. At that time, Chen Yoan was the prince who saved the Ulan envoy, who fell into a trap because of the Blade God's 6 martial clan. That was probably why she didn't think of Chen Yoan as arrogant and self-righteous as the rumors said. At least, that was what she thought. But Chen Yoan didn't even act like he knew her and spoke in a cold voice. Move. Ah. It was disappointing. Even Moyong Kong, who was watching it, couldn't hide his embarrassment. He knew how great Jigul Sohee's beauty was and thought that he would certainly talk to her out of consideration. When the envoy went to the demonic cult, He thought Chen Yuan helped them because he saw the beauty of Jigul Sohi. Is he a person who has no sympathy? Men tend to be weak in front of beautiful women, but not every man would wait for a beautiful one. Even so, they would still show interest in beauty. Lord Chun. Why did you suddenly come onto our ship? She had to divert his attention. She had to keep a conversation going. But unfortunately, nothing worked. Are you deliberately pretending to not know? At those words, Sohi's eyes trembled. She didn't say anything for a long time, but she knew what Chen Yuan meant. We are in a crisis, because we neglected that moment. She bit her lip. Her face was hot. Because it was the same as Chen Yuan pointing out that they are protecting Kong Soa. It seems that he came onto an enemy ship in the vast lake, because he had to do something. Kong Soa's voice came from behind, while Sohi was in a pinch. He is my guest. Step aside. Be but leader Kong. Don't disturb us, and leave. Jigul Sohi frowned at the stubborn voice. Haha, this isn't a place where your pride should be saved. There was nothing she could do. She was disappointed at Kong Soa's cold words towards her, but she stepped aside. In the current situation, there was no other way than for Kong Soa to overcome the problem he created alone. She just hoped that he wouldn't do anything stupid. Leader Kong. His opponent was one of the best warriors in the world. If he put his mind to it, not a single person on the ship would survive. Apologizing seemed like the best method to reduce damage to the warriors. This man is the lord of the demonic cult, Chen Yuan. Kong Soa's eyes narrowed. He was a monster who turned his brother, Yun Buso, who was a genius, into a cripple. And if he could deal with the lord of the demonic cult, it would be the shortest way to elevate his position in his clan, and he could even get a position in the forces of justice. However, I was not supposed to make any mistakes. But of course, there were mistakes. He never thought that the lord of the demonic cult would personally lead their contingent. He is not an opponent to easily take. Kong Soa looked into Chen Yuan's eyes. It wasn't normal to feel such pressure from a warrior by just looking into their eyes. No frivolous tricks would work on such a person. To destroy evil and reach heaven, I am prepared to make sacrifices. Pack. Kong Soa put his hands together and greeted. It is an honor to meet the lord of the demonic cult. I am Kong Soa, the one in charge of this contingent and the Black Shadow Force. Strong voice. A face with courage without a hint of fear. Please. Jigul Sohi and Moyong Kong were both concerned. But something unexpected happened. Thud. Kong Soa knelt on one knee. And once again clasped his hands and said, if the Lord who came to our ship like this is angry because of the barbarians, I have no excuse. I asked them to stop anyone who pursued us. Ah. Everyone was shocked by Kong Soa's attitude, despite seeing Chen Yuan. They thought that he would speak subtly, but never imagined that he would be so direct. Moyong Kong praised him. Right. This might be the best way to deal with this. It could be humiliating, but this was a lot better than provoking the lord of the demonic cult. Now it was a matter of how Chen Yuan responded. Chen Yuan, who had an expressionless face, opened his mouth. Then pay the price for it. SRRNG. With those words, Chen Yuan drew the white dragon blade, which was on his waist. He was relentless even though he could have chosen another option. Jigul Sohi, flustered and scared, shouted. Lord Chun. We are allies. Are you trying to harm the leader of the contingent sent from the alliance, without even considering the circumstances? At that, Chen Yuan spoke in a tone that said that nothing mattered to him. With what reason did you all plot that? That. Stop wasting my time and pay up. With those words, Chen Yuan's blade went for Kong Soa's right shoulder. It was then. Clang. someone stopped Chen Yuan's white dragon blade. It was none other than Huang Boneng, the head of the Huangbo family. Trrrn. Quack. A gasp escaped from Huang Boneng's mouth. He was prepared to act if anything happened, so he managed to block it at the right moment, but the two palms holding the blade tore and oozed out blood. It looked like he swung it lightly. What is this formidable power? If one looks closely, one can see that the floor around Huang Boneng was dented. If it hadn't been for him, Kong Soa would have lost his right arm. Are you blocking me? At the question of Chen Yuan, who was releasing energy strong enough to burn his opponent's insides, Huang Boneng exclaimed. Commander Kong is in charge of this contingent, which is moving to help North Sea Ice Palace. How could I let you harm him? Despite suffering internal injuries, Huang Boneng didn't back out. Considering the fame of Chen Yuan, it was terrifying to be there, but seeing Kong Soa like that, he didn't want to back out from the situation. Even if everyone calls you demon god, I will not be afraid of you. Huh. Huang Boneng raised his internal energy and straightened his bent knee. After all, once he pushed Chen Yuan, everyone would come up to help Kong Soa. However, there would be those who would end up losing their lives in the process. KWK. TH this. His legs, which he was trying to straighten, dug further into the floor of the ship. Of course, Huang Boneng knew that the demon god wouldn't let himself get pushed, but the difference in power was too great. Quack. Blaze. Blaze. It was so strong that his veins stood up all over his body. Even when he tried to use all his internal energy, it didn't make any difference. As Chen Yuan raised his energy further, Huang Boneng fell to the floor. Ugh. Thud. Everyone's faces on the ship hardened. Huang Boneng, the head of the great Huangbo clan, a renowned martial artist, and a leader in the forces of justice, was one-sidedly taken down. With the title Demon God, Chen Yuan was truly undefeated. If you disturb me once more, I will really kill you. One last warning was given by Chen Yuan, who approached Kong Soa, but the members of the Black Shadow forces drew their weapons and tried to stop him. Stop. If you want to kill our leader, you'll have to kill us first. No matter how terrified they were, they couldn't let Chen Yuan have his way. As Chen Yuan's face turned colder, Kong Soa shouted. Everyone stop. The warriors of the Black Shadow Force couldn't hide their embarrassment at the unexpected order. If they stepped down, the lord of the demonic cult, Chen Yuan, would cut off his arm, so why would Kong Soa order that? It was then. Clash. Tear. Quack. Lu leader. Something unexpected happened. Kong Soa pulled his sword from his waist and cut off his left hand from the wrist down. Jikul Sohi, Moyong Kong, and Dan Jizong were too startled at what they witnessed. Why? Quack. HIAA, drip. 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 Kong Soa screamed in pain as he slowly kept pressuring the blood points to stop the bleeding. He did it with his own hand, but even so, it was so painful that he couldn't speak. While enduring, his lips opened. Huh. HIAA, ugh, I know that this doesn't quench your anger. But this time, we are being sent to the North Sea Ice Palace. Kook, PL, please give me time to finish this job. If you ask me later, I will pay the full price. At Kong Soa's words, Jikul Sohi admired him. It was the to solve one's problem at the cost of their own body strategy. Sacrificing the body before the opponent could put pressure on the opponent, and the man would be able to avoid further pain. HIAA, if I can get rid of this situation by giving up my left hand, it isn't a huge price to pay. If he did that, even the lord of the demonic cult would feel troubled. After all, seeing that he aimed for the shoulder, it looked like Chen Yuan only wanted his arm. It meant that he had no intention of killing Kong Soa. The rumors that those who can't kill aim for arms are true. Then, doing this, to myself, will reduce the damage. Kong Soa boldly cut off his hand. The perfectly calculated outcome, as he was a right-handed person, and at the same time, it would give the impression that he paid for his sins with his left hand. He will stop if he considers his prestige. The lord of the demonic cult, one of the three major forces, if he pushed further, people would laugh at him. Kong Soa looked at Chen Yuan with a pale face. Chen Yuan looked at this and opened his mouth. This is the first time something like this happened. Phew. As he said those words, Kong Soa cried in joy inside. It meant that his gamble paid off. Rather, it was better this way than making some excuse to Chen Yuan. I just need to hope that the dragon turtle's blood and core will work properly. Kong Soa wanted the blood of the dragon turtle. According to ancient documents, it was said that if one took the blood or core of one of the 5 spirit beasts, severed body parts could be restored. Taking that into account, he cut off his hand. I need to get that blood. Kong Soa's true purpose for volunteering for this mission was because of the dragon turtle. He believed that if he took the core of the 4-headed dragon, he would be able to explore its power, which would make him rise closer to becoming one of the 5 great warriors. Chen Yuan looked at Kong Soa and shook his head. I was thinking of taking your arm, I didn't know you would make the first move. This is quite nice. At those words, everyone sighed in relief. It looked like they were able to avoid the battle with the demon god. It was foolish, but the method worked. Jiggle Sohi smiled bitterly. Kong Soa expressed his gratitude to Chen Yuan by enduring the pain in his wrist. Thank you for your generous mercy. I will repay you for this disgrace in the same way someday. His outside actions and inside thoughts were different, but he didn't show his true intentions. As the saying goes, a gentleman's revenge is never too late. He was enduring this disgrace in order to destroy the demonic cult later. He is scarier than Yan Buso. Even Moyong Kong, head of the Moyong family, couldn't help but admire Kong Soa. Maybe in the future, when Kong Soa has the power and wits, he would be able to deal with the lord of the demonic cult. At that time, Chen Yuan approached Kong Soa, who was relieved, and asked, "What do you usually do if someone who is likely to turn into a pain tries to get out of your sight?" "Huh? Seeing what kind of person you are, I only wanted to end this matter with one arm. But I changed my mind after seeing what's rolling in your head." Kong Soa's face turned pale at Chen Yuan's words. He realized that the plan wasn't going in the way he wanted them to. And no way. Confused, he tried to step back. Quack. Chen Yuan, who grabbed Kong Soa's collar, calmly told him, "Die here. Wait. What are you doing now, slash?" At that moment, Chen Yuan's white dragon blade passed through Kong Soa's neck, leaving behind a white trajectory. Kong Soa blinked his eyes at what happened so quickly. Damn it. Slash. Before he could finish speaking, his severed head fell to the ship's floor. Roll. Looking down at Kong Soa's head, which had its eyes wide open, Chen Yuan muttered in a cold voice, "Your head is indeed rolling." Chapter 415. North Sea Ice Palace. Part 3. Everyone on board the ship thought that the situation had been resolved amicably. Although the commander suffered the humiliation of cutting his hand off, it was far better than confronting the lord of the demonic cult, Chen Yuan. But clash. Roll. Everyone was shocked to see Commander Kong Soa's head rolling on the floor. Who would have imagined that he would meet his end like that? Even though Kong Soa is the second son of Emok, the head of the forces of justice, with whom they had an alliance, there wasn't an ounce of hesitation. "Kong Soa! Commander!" Everyone on the ship cried out. Their cries held both shock and resentment at the death of their commander and the leader of the Black Shadow Force. Jiggle Sohi, the strategist of Ulan, shouted at Chen Yuan with red eyes. Lo, Lord Chun. Isn't this too much? Too much? Commander Kong said he was guilty and cut off his own hand. Besides, apart from that, isn't your cult and the forces of justice allies? Isn't this excessive action on your part? Jiggle, so he wouldn't have acted like that if it was some other day. However, when her fiancé Ian Buso had returned half dead, and now that she witnessed the death of Kong Soa, it ended up triggering her anger. Pat. At that time, Huang Bonung, who had fallen through the ship because of the dent, came up. Looking at the bloodstains on his face and mouth, it seemed like he barely had the energy to come back up, as he had a hard time stopping the energy which had invaded his flesh. How could you do this? Huang Bonung was shocked to see Kong Soa's severed head lying on the ground. He never thought that Chen Yuan would kill him. Thud. How dare you kill our leader? I cannot forgive you. The members of the Black Shadow Force, who had been staring at the head of Kong Soa in despair, couldn't hold back their anger anymore and ran ahead with their weapons in hand. The situation had taken a turn for the worse, and there was no point in holding back with Kong Soa dead. Shoo! 2 warriors of the Black Shadow Force simultaneously ran for Chen Yuan. The tactic of their strife, which was out of anger, wasn't common. I will kill you. However, they couldn't even reach Chen Yuan. Slash. No? At some point, an unidentified monster with a mask that held a unique pattern appeared in a black robe and blocked their attack. As if blocking them wasn't enough, he threw them to the other side of the ship. Thud. Ouch. Ack. Plop. After being hit in their chests for the second time, the 2 of them got thrown out of the ship and fell into the cold lake. Moyong Kong of the Moyong family yelled with a stiff face. The Dark King. The man in the unidentified mask was Mara Kim, the great guardian of the demonic cult. Of course, there was no way that Mara Kim would let Chen Yuan go anywhere alone. Ha. Ha. Harsh breathing sounds came from behind the mask. Although he was a supreme master, he seemed pretty tired as it wasn't an easy task to cross the vast lake. HIA. Lord. HMP. Chen Yuan coughed at the soft telepathy message from Mara Kim. He felt bad. He left a message saying that he would come back once he resolved something and then left them behind. The others had no choice but to stay still as it was impossible for them to follow Chen Yuan. Even if they could, they wouldn't be able to follow Chen Yuan's speed. Did he also run on this wide lake? Haha, the current demonic cult is full of bloody monsters. Everyone was shocked. The eyes of everyone on the ship filled with tension. Even the infamous Dark King appeared as if Chen Yuan wasn't hard enough for them to deal with. They couldn't see a favorable solution. While everyone was hesitating, Chen Yuan opened his mouth and pointed to the head of Kong Soa. I am making this clear. This incident happened because of this person. But, if you think that losing your colleague is so unfair, come at me. It was a calm voice filled with arrogance. And that was enough for them to understand. Chen Yuan was strong enough to annihilate everyone on the ship. Moyong Kong clenched his fists hard enough that they were bleeding and spoke. Lord Chun, do you think that the alliance between the forces of justice and the demonic cult isn't important? When forming an alliance, your sense of right and wrong needs to be left behind. It wasn't Chen Yuan who responded to that. Mara Kim, who calmed his breath to some extent, spoke as he pulled out his sword from his waist. SRRNG. I think that is something that our cult is supposed to ask. Did you really value the alliance when asking the barbarians to attack us? That. It was like being stabbed in the throat. He forgot it in his moment of anger, but the culprit was none other than Kong Soa. They could have stopped it, but they stood aside and neglected the issue. The demon god and the Dark King. The pressure from the tip of Mara Kim's sword made them feel even more nervous. If things went any further, the result would be everyone aboard dying. From the beginning, they weren't blindly hurting us. Jegal Sohi, who failed to control her anger until a moment ago, sighed. They had to accept what was done. To put it bluntly, it was the only solution to rectifying the mistakes done if they supported the demonic cult's words. Is this what a person without power feels like? Up until now, the Ulan had the leading position in Wulin. Not just in the imperial family, but the entire Wulin respected them. Although they had constant battles with the demonic cult, they were never pushed back. However, with the new lord of the demonic cult, their position took a complete change. Is there no one who can stop Lord Chun? It was upsetting, but that was the reality. Perhaps the enemy they really needed to worry about wasn't the Blade God's 6 martial clan, but the demonic cult. Leader Moyong, Jegal. Moyong Kong closed his eyes when he saw Jegal Sohi shake her head. After Kong Soa, who had been appointed as the commander, died, all authority directly went to Moyong Kong, who had the highest position. Whoops! Moyong Kong killed the resentment inside him and spoke. This contingent has no intention of confronting Lord Chun. And you have been paid. Please, for the sake of our alliance, I hope this ends here. Everyone waited for Chen Yuan's answer with tense faces. As Moyong Kong said, Chen Yuan had to be the one to end this fight, and luckily he nodded with affirmation. Phew. Although it was humiliating, they were all relieved. The presence of Chen Yuan, who is the demon god, made them all turn nervous. Is that a relief? Chen Yuan laughed as he looked at the response of the Ulan's contingents. Right now, they were all thinking that the situation had been solved with the sacrifice of Kong Soa. However, they didn't know that the Great Hung clan was going to chase them to death. I don't have to tell them. It was something they had to face. Without Kong Soa, the contingent would have to deal with the wrath of Asura, the war chief who lost both his arms. Let's go. Great Guardian. Marikim's pupils shook as he heard Chen Yuan's message. The direction he was headed wasn't towards the 6 swords, who were on a ship behind them. Now that we have come this far, it's better to go to the island first. Yes. It was obvious, but Marikim reluctantly replied as he just barely managed to catch his breath, but the thought of crossing the lake once again seemed hard to him. Shoo. First, Chen Yuan left, and then Marikim too disappeared from the ship. Shortly after leaving the ship, the people of Ulan looked at them and waited until they completely disappeared. While everyone was doing that, someone lifted Kong Soa's head with both hands. He closed the eyes of Kong Soa, which were open, and silently opened his mouth. The man had a smirk on his face, which no one noticed. My leader. Your noble sacrifice for the heavens will be remembered forever. A shocking truth had been revealed. The hidden identity of Kong Soa, the second son of the Forces of Justice's great leader Imok, and leader of the Black Shadow Force, was one of the leaders of the Forces of Great Heaven. As he was silent, Jegal Sohi brought in the flag of the Black Shadow Force and helped them retrieve the body. Lieutenant Mac. It must be difficult, but the mission isn't over yet, so please lead the Black Shadow Force on behalf of Leader Kong. I understand. A middle-aged man with droopy eyes and half-white hair accepted the role. He was Mac Weijong, the lieutenant of the Black Shadow Force. Above the watchtower on the southwest pier of the island, Dan Jushin, the deputy king of the palace, stared intently at the other side of the lake and suddenly spoke to Seol Young Gwi. Elder Seol. I guess we will have to go down right away. Why so sudden? At those words, Dan Jushin pointed his finger. Seol Young Gwi looked at where he pointed and saw something he hadn't seen before. It was on the side which could be seen from the pier. And as if they were running on flat ground, someone was approaching the island. Is he really doing that? Seol Young Gwi couldn't contain his shock. When he heard Dan Jushin speak about that, he couldn't believe it, but now that he saw it with his own eyes, he couldn't help but be surprised. What? However, they had never seen any person who performed such an arduous feat a bit behind, but there was another person who was keeping a stable pace. Ugh, not just one person. Who the hell are those people? Dan Jushin, one of the best among the warriors of the North, saw two people do something he could barely achieve. I think we should go meet them. Understood. Their exact identity was unknown, but they had to meet them to know. It was clear that they had come from the demonic cult. When they hurried down and arrived at the wharf, around 100 people were waiting in advance, all from the North Sea Ice Palace. You have come? Deputy King of the Palace. They were all soldiers of the palace, the Snow Sword Troops, one of the 5 battle troops of the North Sea Ice Palace. The Snow Sword Troops leader, Baek Go-jung, was about to report to the Deputy King that the ship of Ulan hadn't arrived yet when the surroundings became noisy. There, look over there. Oh my gosh. They are running on the lake. Well, wait. Did they come all the way here like that? What kind of nonsense are you talking about? Even if you are exhausted, your eyes should be working fine. The leader of the Snow Sword Troops, Baek Go-jung, looked towards the lake while mumbling. And he finally said, that is? Shockingly, 2 people were approaching them by running on the lake. It was unbelievable. They were crossing the lake, which was usually crossed by ships, on foot. That's not possible. Everyone was shocked, and the 2 people who were running on the lake stepped onto the dockside and approached them. Whoa! The docks turned noisy. Who were the 2 people who arrived earlier than the forces of justice of Ulan? The first one Dan Jushin looked at was the man in the mask. A mask with a unique pattern. He heard about it from somewhere. When he went to Gyeongju to research the most famous people who could be a threat to the North Sea Ice Palace, there was one who was mentioned. The Dark King? There was only one person in the demonic cult who would wear a mask. The man was known to rule death on the battlefield. Mara Kim, the great guardian of the demonic cult. Is he really the Dark King? Does that mean that the demonic cult really sent a contingent? He guessed that it was the demonic cult based on the black flag and the red characters written on it, but seeing Mara Kim, his guess turned into a correct answer. This meant that Prince Baekhyun really succeeded in requesting their support. Wait. The Great Guardian only moved beside the Lord of the demonic cult, then that means? The young man standing next to him. The Lord of the demonic cult is supposed to be Chun Yujong, a man in his 50s, but the person next to Mara Kim seemed too young. The young man moved a little closer and greeted him. Chun Yewon, the Lord of the Sky Demon Order. Wah! All the people that heard him couldn't hide their shock. Unlike others, the people of the North Sea knew nothing about them. Whoa! Whoa! Aren't we hearing something wrong? The Lord of the demonic cult? The demonic cult has come here? The dock turned even more chaotic. Of course, though shocked, Dan Jushin tried to hide his expression. He tried to protect his dignity as the person representing the North Sea Ice Palace, yet he couldn't stop his trembling eyes. Unbelievable. The prediction he made on the watchtower. It turned out half wrong and half right. It wasn't Chun Yujong, the Lord of the demonic cult, that Dan Jushin knew who had come to the North Sea Ice Palace. Why is the Lord of Sky Demon Order here? Seol Young Gwi was surprised and stuttered until Chun Yewon smiled at him and spoke. We have received a request to dispatch warriors from the prince of your palace.